want to welcome you to our first CTE at Discovery workshop for the semester. Today we'll be talking about, or I won't be talking about, our speakers will be talking about facilitating discussions. And this is the first of 3 workshops that we have planned for the semester. We will also have one planned on co-teaching 201. So we did our first co-teaching workshop last semester. But if you did not attend that one, you still would be very much so primed to attend our second one for this semester. And we also have one on tech tools, yes, strategies in the classroom. So look out for those dates for those upcoming workshops as well. By way of introduction, we have 2 of our presenters here who are representing the Center for Teaching Excellence. We have Dr. Lydia Frass, who is an instructional designer. She has her PhD in adult education and also an MPH. Yay, public health. And also was previously staffed here in our School of Public Health, so some familiar faces for Lydia here. We also have Dr. Nate Carnes, who comes to us as the Associate Director for CTE, and he is also faculty in our College of Education. So what they will both be facilitating discussion today and helping usher us through active learning and kind of a lived experience, if you will. So please be engaged. They promise not to necessarily go the full time, but definitely want to make this a learning experience where we can all be engaged and use some of the tools that they share with us in our classrooms. Thank you, guys.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yes, I do realize that I'm on Lydia's home turf, so I'll try to do my best not to make any glaring mistakes or whatever, but we are certainly glad to be here. The session today, as already mentioned, is about facilitating discussions. This is built and drawn from the Horizon 2000, well, depending on how you look at where its home went, 2017, and then it went to EDUCAUSE in 2018 report, which was basically a state of the art of college and university teaching. And one of the main thrusts throughout that whole report is about engaging university students in a more active manner. I know many of us, if we look back over our own learning history, we probably remember all of those courses in which the professor was basically the talking head, giving us information. We wrote it down and tried to give it back to them as best as they wanted on written exams. However, the Horizon 2017/2018 report has said that we need to embark on some changes. And I know probably many of us have in our own lives have seen where changes were needed, in which that students were treated more as active learners and that they learned by doing. And so we're going to do our best to try to emulate that, and, walk the talk and get you moving around a little bit just to give you a feel on the student side, which hopefully will get you thinking about what you might do, what changes you might make in your various courses. So with that, we settled on facilitating discussions and looking at that component of teaching. This, by the way, has been around for a while, but not so much at the university level, because that same Horizon report drew a lot from what happens in pre-college settings. And what the recommenders had pointed out was that there are multiple strategies that are used in high schools, middle schools, or should be, and elementary schools that we should be adopting now. And we know that we're probably a little more pressed to do it now, because you know how our students will kind of drift away from us a little bit even with the most important information that we're trying to give them. So there's a lot more to be said about that, but with that, we're going to get started. We'll have you moving around again a little bit, and we are also going to not necessarily go the full advertised time, if that's okay with you, because I know we're all very busy and have lots of things to do. Okay? So?
So we just wanted to start off with letting you know that what we're using is fair use and, as much as possible, Creative Commons license to give you some legalese and to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today, which is an introduction to several different discussion techniques and actually demoing some different strategies that you can use in your class. We'll also try and talk a little bit about how you can relate that online and sum up everything relating and tying everything back to the online. I know some of you are teaching both online and face-to-face, and the skills are to develop and plan are almost the same, but the technique for online is a little different. And then finally, we'll give you some opportunities to actually reflect on how you can possibly use some of these strategies in your own classes.
Yeah, and even as we're transferring, I just want to draw, we'd like to be responsive as possible. So while I was here last time, there were several calls for online. I have limited experience, unlike Lydia. So I was like, Lydia, we need to be talking more about online as well. So.
Okay. Throughout the time that we're together, please feel free to ask questions, interject, whatever you need. We'll have some built-in time for questions and debriefing throughout the time, but we're casual, so please feel free to just take advantage. So let's start off, though, with some introductions. We've been introduced, but we'd like to know some of who you are, what you're doing in your classroom, what you're teaching. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what and how you're using discussions in your class already. So I know some of you, so would anybody like to volunteer? So, should I call on people?
Okay, let me start.
Awesome, thank you, Miriam.
So I am Miriam Torres with Epidemiology and Biostatistics, and we will be starting a new class that we've worked for a long time in the restructure MPH, and it is called Public Health 725 Quantitative Methods for Public Health Practice. And we are thinking, and we will start taping the online version of that class soon. So I'm very excited to be here and learn from you. I always learn from both of you within the classroom or in one-on-one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
And I'm Janet Place, and and I currently teach PBH 700, which is a huge class now, over 100 students. It's all online, yeah. And so I've been slowly, I got TA, but I slowly converting a lot of it to self-scoring for obvious reasons. But when I inherited this from Mike Bird, there's a lot of group discussion required, and I have now cut it down to just one because it's so, students hate it so much. And yet I think it's useful. So that's an issue, like how to set it up so that they do engage. It's a lot easier for grade groups too. So, and I also teach HISPM 715, which is community assessment, and that's also online. But in addition, I just mentioned I also lecture in the PA program in the School of Medicine, and that's a group of clinicians that I'm teaching public health to, and getting them face-to-face to be engaged is a real challenge, and I'm about to do it in a month, so it's great timing for this.
Very cool.
I'm Zach Jenkins, and I work with Janet in workforce development. And currently I only teach one class, and that's University 101, which is discussion-based all around.
Yeah.
So I figured this would be a great way to enhance my toolbox with that.
Well, you can also learn a lot from what you're doing in U101. Right? They have some really great strategies out there that are given to you. So, very cool.
I'm Mohammed Baloucha. I'm in Environmental Health Sciences, and I teach one undergrad and one graduate course. The undergrad is environmental health sciences. It's a kind of basic course for the entire School of Public Health. And the graduate course is more specialized in environmental nanoscience. I try to use different techniques for discussion. I use small group discussion. And one of the experiments I did last year was to just give students pictures to try to discuss them. It was though challenging because students typically want some guidelines. And whenever you give them the guidelines, they will stick to the questions you've given them and they will not go beyond what was intended to be kind of open discussion. So that was a challenge. And well, any hints and help with that would be great as well. And some other ideas would be as well.
My name is Bardet Zamfar. I'm in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Culture. I teach French. I'm an instructor of French. Right now I teach a course called Oral Communication in French, but so I have some obstacles there because the goal is the language proficiency rather than discussing the content really. So I use movies, French movies, to get some discussions going. And next semester I will be teaching a course in French cinema. That course will be in English, and I have to start from the zero with the syllabus. So I'm looking for ways to integrate, implement discussion-inducing techniques.
I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Farza.
Farsa. Okay.
Hi, I'm Rachel Davis. I'm in health promotion, education, and behavior. I usually teach 2 graduate level courses that are both fairly small. So my challenge is to facilitate a discussion with the whole class at the same time. And I'm 110% introvert, so I find
I'm with you there, Rachel.
yeah, I learned from another professor to think of questions in advance about the readings, and I put them on slides. But after that first question, I have a hard time thinking of additional questions or getting them to talk with each other more than just me. So that's what I'm hoping to learn about.
My name is Whitney Zond. I'm a postdoc in the School of Public Health with the Rural and Minority Health Research Center. I haven't taught a lot of my own courses, but I've been an assistant instructor working with my mentor and her classes, and I've done a fair amount of guest lecturing. And one of the main things I kind of want to develop is, going forward in my career, I foresee teaching both methods-focused class and more content-focused class, and I find that methodological classes don't always lend themselves as well to discussion, so I want to make sure that I can learn how, strategies for integrating discussion into that so it's not as dry. So that's what I'd really like to learn a little bit more how to do.
Very good. Well, thank y'all so much for telling us. Lucy?
Sure, yes. I'm sorry I have to go in and out of the session, but I'm Lucy, faculty in HPEE. I teach primarily, of course, in race, ethnicity, and health. And over the 11 plus years I've been here, it's grown in size from about 9 students to this semester I have 37 students. Also, it was primarily graduate students when I first taught it, and now it's 36 undergraduate students and 1 graduate student. So it has definitely changed in some exciting ways, but given the content and for a lot of students who have admitted that it's the first time they have openly talked about race and culture, I think even as the class continues to grow in interest and popularity, it's vital that I promote discussion. And so some things that I've done, I teach it in person and online, and so some things I've done have been to do discussion groups online. I've also done small group work, think, pair, share, things like that. And so as the class grows, I know it won't be as easy to facilitate those things, but with the same spirit, I want to learn some new ideas for how to continue to facilitate open discussion.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. At any time that we're missing something that you'd like to, just raise your hand again and remind us, this is what I'd like, so let's talk about it. Before we get started though, let's start off this time together with, let's set some ground rules for discussions. So we're gonna have a first activity. where I'd like for you to think about what in a classroom environment are good ground rules that you should have in your class for good facilitated conversations. Think about this individually, then I want you to get in groups of 4 each. We could split into 2 groups. I want you to each take a turn sharing what you think your ground rules should be. I want you to go in a circle. I don't want you to interrupt anybody else, and I want everybody to have a fair opportunity to express their idea. And then I want you to talk about those ideas together, and then we're going to come back together and set the ground rules for the class. So if you don't mind, break up into 2 different groups. You can either circle around where you are or move to another place in the room. Does anybody have any questions? So what are the ground rules for our conversations, our discussions today? So an example, everybody should raise their hand before they say anything. I can interrupt at any time so long as it's polite. I can only stand, if I'm going to speak, I have to stand up. So what are some rules that you would like to have when we're going through discussions today? We're going to take about 2 minutes to think first, then about 2 to 3 minutes to share.
I can talk about Chef. Sure. All right. So we obviously open discussion with politeness, with respect. Use active listening. So shut down those cell phones. And my son has the flu. He's really sick, so I have to check with him. But that's okay. And then finally, share experiences and resources, but within context. Don't go off. So that's what we had. I do. Oh, what about the second question? You kind of gave us a second, George?
Let's get
Okay.
their groups,
All right.
their rules first, and then we'll come bounce back. So what were some good rules that y'all think should be part of this, a good facilitated conversation? I heard some good things bounce off back there.
I came in a little late, so I'm gonna let them.
We came up with several different kinds of things, and it kind of depended. So a few things I think were good is depending on the nature of the conversation, that there's no wrong answer. So obviously if it's something that is more concrete, but if it's opinion, that people feel open to sharing their opinion. Come prepared. So if it's a discussion question that's relevant to reading or previous things, that students are prepared for that discussion. Some form of raising your hands or something to indicate that you want to speak, and that so there's not interrupting of each other. And kind of in my silent kind of thing, I made 2 sets of rules. So but another way to maybe facilitate discussion that's helpful for maybe people who are a little more quiet or going to be unsure is to go in a circle and allow everybody the opportunity to speak. That doesn't mean they have to, but that maybe allows for that discomfort to be mitigated a little bit. They don't feel like I'm going to interrupt, or I don't know if I want to talk. But if they have the floor, so to speak, for that period of time, they might feel a little more comfortable.
Perfect. I heard I did hear you and talk about not being judgmental.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm going to throw that in there. How does that sound as a ground rule?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to interject here that we are going old school, so sometimes there's a place for old school. But this could have been done electronically. Exactly. We have OneDrive and OneNote, and Nate's a big proponent of Padlet. So even something like this could be done electronically in a live session. So to get that. So
Yeah, I think basically then everything else is almost good.
okay. So what we have overall are having open discussions with politeness, respect, active listening, share shared experiences within the context of whatever it is. No wrong answers if it's an opinion, but if it's something that's factual, then that has to be corrected. Come prepared, raise your hand or have some sort of indication that you'd like to speak. Everyone has a chance to share. There's no judgment. Encourage people to feel safe and embrace technology. How does that sound overall for ground rules for today and possibly some things you'd like to do in your classes or even in your professional settings? Yes.
Sounds good, but I guess I can see where some of them might be conflicting.
Yes,
each other.
one specifically.
So if you want people to share and be free to express what their opinions are, those opinions may be judgmental or offensive to other people. And so, I don't know.
Okay.
You'll probably
They
get
can say it, we just won't judge it. Here, here.
or be offended.
Or be
You also have the raising your hand versus
Or have respect as a value. Even though
And
it
not
can be
interrupt, like I just
defined, can be defined differently, but respect
And it's the role of the
opinions of
discussion.
others.
You know, because I think, I know in my class, we've gotten in some discussions and I can see people's faces, you know, that sort of thing. But it's the process, I guess, of the discussion and how you present it. And, you know, how people may not agree, disagree, it may not be part of your value, but let's discuss this. But I see what, you know, because I see a lot of the eye rolling and kind of, I can't believe they said that sort of thing. But
Very cool.
Yeah, that actually, that's great. I'm not going to go too far in because it's really not part of our presentation. But you just hit on another very important point.
We deal with this in our teacher education classes, in which I was thinking when you were talking about the reservation or conflict, sometimes people execute what we call triggers. And Lucy, I don't know if you've heard of, we use it a lot with race, ethnicity, social justice, and so forth. You know, like Lydia, I don't know everything about Lydia, and so I might say something that causes an instant angst in her. That would be called a trigger. And so the way of handling it, since it's not part of, I'm going to just cut right to the chase. When a trigger comes up like that, you know, that you just said something, and that emotionally that causes an outburst inside of me, which may lead to an outburst. The thing that we should teach our students to do is to acknowledge the trigger rather than to be defensive about it. It's like, oh, so I guess I said something that really bothered you. The professional term is, I triggered you. Why is this a trigger for you? You know, not in a judgmental way, but it's one of seeking to learn. It's like, so why, tell me how or why that is a trigger, and then to accept and honor that. Even though it's no big deal for me, but it is for you, then I should get to learn that just like in a minute or two, and then seek to avoid that so that we can get on with the business. Sometimes what happens is, oh, what did I say? That doesn't bother me. Why should it bother you? Well, see, that's that defensiveness, and we got to break down that barrier so that we can go ahead with the discussion.
So to start the debrief on this, this is one strategy that you can use in your class to start conversations, to start discussions. It is called the Circle of Voices technique. And setting ground rules is a great way to start getting buy-in from your students, to let them have some of the authority in the classroom, to respect their judgment. But a lot of times we know what is a good conversation. We know what is respectful. And I'm more likely to adhere to those principles, to those rules, if I'm part of that process. We do this professionally all the time. Well, not all the time, but a good part of the time. And in public health, setting ground rules in public forums is part of the techniques you use in community health building. So some of the skills that you're learning in HPEB and in the other programs are some of the same skill sets that you can use in your classroom. So part of this is really good in setting ground rules in your class to set the expectations for your students, to let them know what you're thinking too. If there's something in here that they miss that you think is very important, that respect, that non-judgmental piece, if they don't mention that, that's definitely something you should, as the instructor, as the faculty member, include on the list. And part of this is also a really good way, if you're going to have those difficult conversations with students, to set the ground rules in advance so that when those topics come up, you can always say, hey, look, we set ground rules on how to have conversations in this class. Everybody's going to be respectful, so I'm expecting everybody to adhere to these rules that you were part of the process in doing. The one thing that is very, very important is making sure that these conversations, the discussions are always related to the content. Have them always, and we'll get into this a little bit more too, but some of the shared experiences within context is very important. There are times when students should be able to express their opinion, but sometimes, especially in an academic setting, they should be relating it back to the course content, to the research, to facts, but always tying it back so that it's an informed opinion, not just an arbitrary, just off the cuff. There's a time and a place for that also. But in terms of content and discussions, you always want to, and this will always help center things back into a good tone in the classroom. Any questions about setting ground rules, about the circle of voices as a technique? How did you feel about using the circle of voices? What did you think about the silence? The time to think? Let me tell you, it's really, really hard for me to sit up here and not talk. And I'm an introvert, don't like to talk, but it's a challenge to be the instructor in front of the class, to be the facilitator and be quiet, because I feel like we've always got to say something and add something. What did y'all think? What did y'all think when you're in your class, giving people time?
I don't mind being silent, but I hate it when you ask a question and it's silence. Mm-hmm. That's what you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's when you're waiting, I'm not good. I feel like, and I just sit there and everybody, you can tell that they're all, but I hate that. I hate silence. It's very uncomfortable and you feel like you've got to say something, and then I try, come on, anybody. It does, but it's very an awkward feeling.
It really is. It really is.
It is. There are two things to remember about this, and
is what we know about questioning. Mary Bud Rowe, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of her. Unfortunately, she's passed a while ago. She gave us some very important insight into the silence. Actually, what she does say that when we do ask a question, optimally, and this is based on the research that she's done and others, is that we should actually offer at least 5 seconds of silence, because that's when, and that seems like an eternity when you have not done it. In fact, I used to have a rickety chair that I would just rock. I would rock for 5 seconds, 1001, 1002, etc. Because what they do, they need time to think and process. I mean, we do as human beings in order to have thing. And then for discussion, the best thing to do is then the response comes, and then that's called wait time 1, what I just explained. And then when they respond, you go into wait time 2, which is you wait 5 more seconds. And it's like, was that right? And someone else may chime in and even break that 5-second time, which is what you want, because you're on your way to a good discussion then.
Mom?
Sorry.
The worst part when in the silence when you give them 5 or 10 minutes to discuss and then you sit there. And to break that, I just, instead of sitting and waiting, I do go in circle to the different groups and try to engage with them in some discussion so that I keep my time busy all the time. So
Well, that's actually very, very good if you have several different groups too, to make sure that they're on topic.
Exactly.
And to keep yourself busy and to be part of the group. Rachel?
I have 2 questions, I guess. I'm personally comfortable with silence, but I realize sometimes when there's silence, maybe they didn't do the reading and they're not prepared. And I kind of have to decide what I'm going to do about that. And then the second thing is sometimes I realize I've not asked a good question. And so I don't know if that's been part of your presentation about how to ask good questions. Because sometimes I think my questions they're too abstract or they're not sure what I want from them, I guess. So I'm not that great on my feet. Like,
We are going to get in a little bit later about different types of questions and give you some question stems and a couple of resources that you could use that are just general big picture questions too. So based on what you're trying to accomplish with the conversation.
Yeah, I have a suggestion, but I'll hold it till we get to that slide, and maybe it'll be helpful.
Yeah, it was kind of related to what she said, is that that silence following a question asked is very stressful for us, because that time determines if we have built properly toward the proper answer and we've prepared the students. But if suddenly a good response pops up, we realize that, well, that silence has been like constructive and they have had the time to reflect. But I think a good way of avoiding that silence being very like not end well is to prepare better questions and build toward the answer.
Absolutely. Very cool. Well, thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, and so I don't mind the silence either. I guess I'm partly introvert. But what a hybrid is, if I'm doing something where I want them to think first and then share, is I'll set my timer. So it also keeps me honest with, okay, I've given you 2 minutes, but it also gives them something to look forward to. Like, when's that thing gonna, that alarm gonna go off? So I don't know if that would be useful as well.
I have one last comment. You may be covering this later, but I don't know, I never thought of this before, but I've been trained in technology of practice facilitation, and they go by ORID, which is like, the first question is objective. So people don't have to think, what happened? And then you sort of slowly move into the sort of reflective, well, how do you feel? How does it make you feel? And then it's sort of a reflective, like, well, what really stands out, and what do you think you really would like to see happen? And then following, like, okay, what do we do about this issue? So that it sort of builds from a more comfortable spot. And so I don't know why I never thought to use that. So thank you for this class. I mean, but there are a lot of resources. There's stuff out there on that I can send to people, but it's just, and there's all these questions, and you'll get, it's probably the same thing.
There's a slide there later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Uh-oh. Oh, a timer.
Oh, my time's up.
silence.
Yeah. So another thing that I was thinking about, we spent I don't know how much time when we're together planning, just because we keep bouncing things off of each other. One of the things, this is our first activity. I have found, this is just recent, that I've been messing around with some of my teaching, because I'm very sensitive about my teaching. I want it to be the best that I can offer. And I'm sure I have lots of company. One thing that I tried in this class, I never taught this class before that I'm teaching this semester. And I got to thinking, and part of the awkwardness in entering into discussion is, one, you got to be familiar with what we're going to discuss. But we also have to be familiar with whom we're going to discuss. And I know our instructional time is very tight. We're ready to go. And I don't know how many of you have done what I've done. It's like, come on, let's jump into the content. No, we only have 15 weeks. Let's go. Now, I found it be very important, because I didn't share this, but part of my background, I was a science teacher before I went to the university level. I was astounded to find that even in middle school, when I taught my 8th graders, that most of them did not know each other. But they had been in classes, they had been in school for a while, and that can be the same case with our upper register, like graduate students and so forth. I asked my folks at the beginning of this semester, say, how many of you know each other? I mean, at least one other person. A few people raised their hand out of about 25 to 30. And then I asked, how many of you know at least 5 people in this class? Nobody. So what I'm working toward, it is, while it seems like I got to get all this done, it's worth the time for people to get to know each other a little bit, not delve into their business, but become a little bit familiar, because if we think about it, we have discussions a lot with people we know. And with people we don't know, we may not even greet them. Like when you're walking down the street, you don't say, hi, oh, do you have a minute? We don't do that. That's not part of our culture. But, yeah, well, sometimes you could pay for that too. But what I'm saying is, in our class, when we want discussion, they have to get familiar with each other. So I could see applying something like this, even with just like an introductory of who are you, what's one of your hobbies, or you could just think of a question that might reveal themselves in light of what we're getting ready to study. For example, in some of the classes with diseases, have you share with someone if you ever had a illness that you thought, wow, this is almost too much for me to take, or something like that. Nothing to get into personal. And once they get warmed up with each other, they start to open up. Because I was sharing with Lydia, my class, actually, it happens every time we meet. The people come in, they sit down, it's just as quiet as it is now. I was like, wow, these guys. But then when we get into the discussion, I have to raise my voice to get everybody's attention, or use a signal, because they're getting familiar with each other. So I would say, if it's nothing but 5 or 10 minutes at first class meeting, it is, for me, I have found that it is worth them to get to know each other a little bit, because that's then when the discussions start to take off, when we have them.
So we wanted to just share some examples, ground rules. I just found these on the internet. Nate has his own that he he brings into his class too. And either you can bring these in. Definitely have your own set of ground rules. If you're going to do a ground rule exercise, have some already pre-written out for yourself, so that you can interject and make sure that they're on track. And in connection to online learning, those who've been teaching online and who've worked with us, we have netiquette rules, and it's to set that expectation for students of how to behave online. A lot of times, in terms of don't use all caps, treat people with respect, even beginning email salutations. Some things, and especially online, people are so used to texting and the abbreviations that you forget proper professionalism sometimes. Sure.
What I see is all students need to participate from the beginning. Because I get 10 or 12 students that submit all their posts at 11:59 a.m. And they haven't read any of the others. So if there's a way, to make sure that people participate from the beginning.
And one thing that we recommend is, with online discussions, is to have staggered due dates. Yeah. You post, and then you have post 1, post 2, post 3 at 3 different times too. In terms of this online, this could be your icebreaker. In terms of, in an online class, you have first day self-introductions. Some people do scavenger hunts. Some people will do tell me about your summer vacation. It could be, especially in those classes with tough topics, this doesn't necessarily cover everything that you came up with. It could be your first exercise is, tell me about your summer vacation, read over the netiquette, go and let's talk about some good ground rules for controversial topics. That could be your first day conversation in an online environment. So just wanted to give you some examples, and any questions about that before we move on?
I would say for the netiquette, you have to make sure you cover all the bases. In the face-to-face, I was thinking of this after some of our deliberation, is drawing from some of what we learned pre-college. It's good to have as few rules as you can so that people don't get so wrapped up in like, oh, am I violating anything? But if you just have a few broad ones, for example, respect each other. That's a very broad one. You can have a brief discussion or drawing from cooperative learning. You can make a T-chart. One column is what does that look like? What does that sound like? And then make sure everybody understands that way, because then you're still engaging them. They're processing what's going on rather than, okay, tell me what to do, so forth. I remember one time in middle school when I taught, we had 20 rules, and of course the response we got was, man, we're in prison. We can't do anything. And our folks, they're more sophisticated than that, but sometimes that feeling comes out. It's like, well, I don't want to discuss, I might break one of the rules. So just keep them, it's best to keep them broad. Now mine look like the ones that Lydia posted, so I got some work to do. But what I'm saying is where you can, just make them broad, simple, easy to remember, and very practical related to the course, and things should be good.
Sounds good. So we're moving into planning, discussions, and question types. Nate?
Okay. For planning is everything. Making connections is extremely important. So when we're planning, and I'm going back to something that you were saying earlier, is that we look at what's the purpose of the discussion in the first place? Why are we having the discussion? Does this lend itself to discussion? Those are key questions. Because as you know, in teaching, there's not any pristine set of strategies that we should use all the time. If that were the case, one of us would have written a book and just living off the royalties while everybody buys it, right? Okay, but we have to, when we're planning, brainstorm some strategies and question types. This session is not about necessarily questioning, because there's a lot that goes into questioning, like, the type, and then I just presented one structure of, where you have wait time 1, wait time 2, and that sort of thing. But preparation is very important. So I'm going to go back to the response of, okay, well, I wrote down the question that I wanted my students to answer. But what if something else comes up? Then what do I do? Well, that's where the brainstorming kind of comes in. What are all the possibilities? Not necessarily that you're going to lock them all down, but it gets you kind of prepared. So what I would do is look at what we're going to discuss. What are the key components to it, particularly if it's a conceptual question? Conceptual questions are the big picture questions. Well, what feeds into that? And go ahead and list those questions. This does not mean that I'm going to ask every question that's on my prompter. But what it does mean, it's what I used to tell some of my younger students, it's better to have and not need than to need and not have. So you just kind of lay it out, because sometimes you may have some questions laid out and someone in the class might ask the question, and the discussion takes a more organic perspective. In that case, you can just check. We got this done. We took care of that. That was an essential question I wanted asked, and it happened. So I can move on. So, and as we have here, it's very important to prepare how we're going to open and also how we're going to close, because we don't want our discussions to be great discussions and then, the mighty clock on the wall says it's about time to quit, and so it's like, okay, and then it dies down. Okay, because some of the best classes that I've heard my students describe is when the discussion pours out into the hallway as they're leaving. That's when it's becoming real practical. That's when it's becoming real meaningful. It's becoming more personable, and chances are the quality of learning is going to go up.
So one thing also is to pre-think, especially in public health. What some of the controversial topics are. Immunization right now. obesity and physical activity is not necessarily controversial, except for vaping is a big thing right now. So what are some of these things that are going to create the conversations. The race and diversity issues are always, or could possibly be sensitive. The funding models in terms of the politics and how the politics affects that. These are controversial topics. So not only plan the questions, but also the ground rules in terms of what are you going to do to keep things centered back on the context. Always relate things back to the objective. Have an objective for that lesson, for that day. Any questions about that? So we wanted to also talk about interactions. When you're planning your questions, when you're planning a discussion or conversations in the class, face-to-face, Nate used the term connections, and he's going to tell you a little bit about these 3 bullet points real quick in terms of connections, and I'll move on to online interaction.
Yeah, then Lydia has it online. Okay, so I actually, to be full disclosure, I learned about this from one of my colleagues in language and literacy, and it's been very helpful. Text is used they use text in a very broad manner. It can relate to our reading that we have them to do. It can also relate to different kinds of understanding. Some of it might be tacit, some of it may be very, up front, right there, that kind of gives us an idea of how we should conduct ourselves, how we should operate, or how we should think about the piece of information. So one connection would be the text to text. In one case, that could be, all right, so I'm teaching my class, and I know that they took your class as a prerequisite to mine. So the connection might be, so, all right, this is what we're dealing with, class, and I want your discussion to center around, how does this relate to your class that they took last semester or last year? Someone might have to scratch your head a little bit and say, now what was it that we learned? But you can have prompts there to engage that. So it's about making a connection to material that they have received. And I know that School of Public Health is working on some integration kinds of things. This would be a beautiful way of teasing that out. The other is text to self. This kind of connection is looking for personal meanings. So what am I going to do with this? How does this impact me personally? How's my thinking changed? Sometimes the question of, what do you know now that you didn't know before comes up. And because of the diversity that's in our class, I sometimes ask, what did you know that you didn't know before? And some people are like, well, I knew that. Okay, what do you know better than what you knew before? So you can slip that in as a discussion question. And then the other, text the world, it's not necessarily the whole wide world, but it is in the broader context. Like we're talking about vaping in this class, but well, what broader implications does that have? There could be a question of, okay, you are an invited speaker. What will you say? How will you impact individuals one way or another? So that's the face-to-face.
And in planning for online, we use the terms interactions to plan student-to-student interactions, plan student-to-instructor and student-to-content. If you're going to have conversations, discussions in class, you definitely need to plan those out in advance to prompt your question prompts or exercises and write explicit instructions. But before these students can actually have those conversations, they need instructional content. So you need to make sure that whatever the conversation is, you need to somehow link them to those resources so that they can have prepared, informed conversations. So just wanted to put this in context of planning. And then we're going to talk a little bit about question types at the big, broad sense to help you with planning. There are tons of different question types, and we're not going to get into all the different types, but just we wanted to provide you with some big picture concepts.
Yes. So, like I said, well, Lydia already said, but we're still dipping in the questioning on because that's so critical to discussion. So,
we thought about these two broad classifications of questions. The convergent ones is, we thought to share that very briefly because convergent questions are the type of questions that are a misfit to discussions. Because what they do, they bring the thinking to the one point. Like I want them to know this particular piece of information about epidemiology, okay? But again, that may not lend itself much to a discussion. That's why we're also just trying to be very clear. Discussions, we wouldn't advocate using discussions all the time. Okay. But there are times that they are fruitful. But when I'm looking at my list, what questions do I want to ask my students? So I'm glad we had the planning slide up, because when I'm looking, I say, what am I going for? Where should we be at the end of this class? And I find that there's this point in the horizon where I want them to go. That's going to consist primarily of convergent questioning, which means then I don't think discussion is going to be a good fit. Now, where I'm looking for like application and looking at different settings and so forth, that's where I would go to the divergent one. I'll take opinions, as it was said, and so I'm sorry that I'm repeating some things. But what I want, though, I want the opinions now to move to the level in which they are informed by what we read, or supposed to have read, and make sense out of that. That's when, and you can turn it different ways. I mean, how would I speak to different populations, different people's socioeconomic status? Some people who may not have attained a certain level of education. How would this look to them? And the discussion could center around that. So the divergent, broad, out, convergent, to a point.
And so these are just two resources that I wanted to share. Jen and I already sprung the Art of the Focus Conversation, the TOPS training, and the ORID. This is a really great resource. I swear there are like 1,000 different scenarios that you can use that will walk you through what kinds of questions, from workplace scenarios to town hall meetings to small group conversations. A more beautiful question is a book that U101 actually, U101, if y'all don't know, every year has a book everybody reads that's going into the class. The instructors read it. It's the general book across campus. This past year, they used a more beautiful question. It's tied into how to, the creativity movement here on campus for the year. And so it is a way to ask questions to help quickly get to solutions to a problem. They ask why, what if, and how. It's a very good book. It's a very high order book. So incoming freshmen might not necessarily be the best to read this book, but it has great questions on how to come up with creative solutions. We don't know how to ask the right questions for creativity anymore, is essentially what it's proposing. And Zach might give you a little bit more of he might actually have a book that you can borrow, but it's truly, I revert back to the Art of the Focused Conversation. Having focused conversations will real quickly get you to a response, and to help you resolve a solution. It will help you bring things to consensus. If that's what, you could do it one-on-one or with groups. So let's take a minute and think about questions that lend themselves to a thoughtful discussion in one of your classes. So I want you to take a minute. Think, pair, share. We should all be familiar with that. Take a minute, think about it, and then turn to your neighbor and discuss questions or topics in your class that might lead to conversations or that you're already having conversations about. Any questions about the rules, about the instructions? Okay. We're going to take 3 minutes for this exercise. Okay. Let's wrap things up. So, would anybody like to share what they think are some good questions or topics in your classes that are lending themselves to great conversations now, or you would like to have? Okay, Rachel?
Our group, we all have the same theme of personal experience, so
Awesome.
anything, whether it was some relating to things in their personal lives outside of class, or I do things with my students in class, so that they have an activity that they want to talk about, or a game or something that's related to class.
Very cool. Anybody?
Mine's
Jay?
just like the simple question of why aren't Americans healthier? So the little upstream.
That's a very good. Start off low and then build up high. Awesome. So,
So, Lydia went at this in a fairly scripted manner. As you are using Think, Pair, Share more, this has been around for a while, as she has said before. You can, as you get to know the class, you can just use your feeling. For example, for mine, I generally don't time at all. I will ask the question. I say, just think about it. Just think about it, because sometimes by this time they're getting kind of ready to jump in, and I'll just have them think about for just a few seconds or so. Looks like people are ready, chomping, ready to share. So just share with someone sitting next to you. One thing about this, if it has not occurred to you, is that this is a great strategy to use for your reticent participants. I noted that some people, are ready to jump in. I don't know how we do this online, but face to face, some people, it seems like you can always get a response from them. Okay, actually, I have another strategy that we don't have here that's simple to use, but for right now, you could just say, hold on, I want you to share with someone else. Or if the class is small enough, you want to pair people. Like you said, this is a talker. I never hear from this person. I'm going to put them together. Sometimes people do not share. It's like, well, that's a dumb idea, so I won't say it. But if I know Lydia, who I view as being much academically stronger than me, and she's like, yeah, that's pretty good, then that emboldens me, right? That emboldens, it's like, hey, I got something, and share. And one thing that we do know out of the special education literature, success builds success. So once again, people's like, hey, that was pretty good. Well, I had Lydia to kind of help.
That's right. That's right. And this actually works well in any size class. If you have a large class, you can have people turn to their neighbors, and you don't have to call on every pair. You could just randomly call, you can ask for volunteers. You could pull somebody in the front, middle, back corner, whatever strategy you want to use in calling on people. It lets people who are shy participate, but it also lets them feel involved in part of this. The whole point of all this, too, is building community and building communication skills for your students, too. So building up slowly and starting from the ground up is a great technique to do that.
In fact, just to accentuate Lydia's point, I just read last year in Chronicle of Higher Ed where a biology instructor from UNC Chapel Hill was using this in her class because she was a little disturbed about how some people were not doing well, and she's benefiting, and actually it's starting to spread through the campus.
Any questions or comments related to Think, Pair, Share as a technique? We also wanted to real quickly share with you some question prompts for critical thinking. This is from Brown University's Center for Teaching and Learning, and we're going to share these out, and the links to all of these resources out later through Lucy. But these are actually tied to Bloom's taxonomy, and from the basic knowledge to down to the bottom, the valuation, the creativity components, and so having these stems. You can, and knowing what your some good STEM questions are that lend themselves to open-ended questions actually can help you plan and have great conversations.
We're going to pick it up just a little bit, and because we have a couple more experiences that we want to engage you into those. Okay,